Hi everyone, I'm live. Okay, so I'm Julie Brett, and today I'm going to be talking about my new book that's called Belonging to the Earth. It's with the Earth Spirit series that's started coming out. So the full title is Belonging to the Earth, Nature, Spirituality in a Changing World. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge that I'm recording this in Darug and Gundungurra country. This land was never ceded. The Darug and Gundungurra people and their neighbours have had a special connection to this land, its waters, its stars, animals, seasons, stories, songs, dances and ceremonies for countless generations. And that connection is deep and abiding. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be listening to me today. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Aboriginal people that I'm going to be mentioning in this talk: Uncle Peter Williams, Uncle Bruce and Auntie Trish Shillingsworth, Joe Clancy and David King, and also to Christopher Hughes, who's from Wales. I'm really grateful that these people have been able to work with me, and I could include their contributions into Belonging to the Earth so that people could hear their important stories as a part of it. I'm so grateful to the people and communities that I've met along the way in many different ways who've taught me so much as well. So I'd also like to thank, of course, the Moon Books team for putting together this conference. It looks like it's going to be a really great weekend. I'm really happy to be here and be a part of it. So an acknowledgement of country. If you're from Australia, you'll be quite familiar with that. It's something that we do at the beginning of many talks and events. My son's school, they do it on a Monday morning at the beginning of school to open the week of learning. We do it at P&C meetings and all kinds of different community gatherings and things like that. Any important event will begin with either an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country, which is when Aboriginal people from the area that you're in will welcome everybody to the place, rather than an acknowledgement of country, which is when someone who's not from the place acknowledges the people who are the traditional owners or the traditional custodians of that place. So, and it's something that I've wanted to bring into all of my talks as someone living in Australia, living in Gundungurra and Darug country, and it's something that more and more people are doing in the nature spirituality community and in Australia just in general. And it's important for me to bring that up and talk about it today because it's a part of the book, Belonging to the Earth. In that book, I was given a brief by the team putting together the Earth Spirit series to look at the idea of how the nature spirituality community is responding to the climate crisis. And for me, that had been quite an experience. I've been looking at it quite a lot. And the main two ways that most of us were looking at it was through learning from Indigenous culture about how to look after the land, and also creating our own rituals for listening to the earth and acknowledging the grief and sadness that we have been experiencing due to the fires that we had and a really bad drought that caused dryness in a lot of our rivers and a lot of fish kills. And then we've had some really severe flooding this year. And of course, the pandemic has affected everybody as well. So these were issues that I wanted to look at. You might know me from my previous book, which is Australian Druidry. And Druidry is a nature spirituality based on what we know of the ancient Celtic Druids. And we look at lots of different nature practices and ways of understanding who our ancestors were and the mythologies of the land that those people came from. But when we bring it to Australia, there's a necessity to rethink things a little bit, to look at the different seasons here, the different landscape, the different animals and plants. And I touched on in that book the importance of acknowledging country as well and learning about Indigenous cultures. But I wasn't at a point in that when I wrote that book to really talk about it. And, maybe I'm still not wholly there. Like, I'm on a learning journey at the moment with this as well. And that's what I was wanting to talk about in Belonging to the Earth. So it includes a number of interviews because it can be quite difficult to talk about Aboriginal culture as a non-Indigenous person or a non-Aboriginal person because there's ownership around certain concepts. And of course, we should be learning from Aboriginal people. So I decided to include interviews so that you could see how people were talking to me and having conversations with me about my learning, so that maybe that you could learn through that as well. And so that's one part of what the book is about. And another part of it is about, the rituals and the different ways that we're all processing everything that's been going on. So I wonder if you're not in Australia, if you might also like to make an acknowledgement of country, or just think about what an acknowledgement of country might mean for you. When we talk about Indigenous culture, it means a culture that's come from the place. It originates in the place that you're in. And considering who are the people that are the Indigenous people where you live might be an interesting thing to meditate on and think about. So, what are the oldest languages in the place that you're in? What are the cultures that have been in that place for a really long time? What are the mythologies that are connected to the landscape where you live? And just, acknowledging that connection to the place that you're in, that those cultures and people and languages have. I think it's a beautiful way to begin any of our practices. And it's something, of course, in Australian Druidry that many of us are bringing into our rituals as a form of respect, something that we do at the beginning of our rituals to, acknowledge the place that we're in. And the word country is used by Aboriginal people to talk about the different nations and countries that are throughout Australia. There are hundreds of different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island to the north countries within the continent, and they're all different language groups, and hold different spaces and different stories. So it's not just one big place. It's many places all across it. So as I talk about this, I'm going to refer to some people as uncle and auntie. And that's a sign of respect in Aboriginal culture to talk about people like that. And I've used that term if somebody's been introduced to me that way. Just as a note, I guess. So the people that I spoke to, I met when I've been on travels around the place, trying to learn more about how we look after the earth, how we look after country. Caring for country together is an important concept that a lot of people talk about at the moment. And so the people that I ended up talking to were all people that were involved in reconciliation work and cultural awareness for non-Indigenous people. So one of the first things that I went on was a trip out to the rivers on the Darling Barker Barwon that has a few different names. I'm trying to get that little bit of hair on my neck. Sorry, it's reversed. Anyway, so we went out to the rivers on this tour because I'd been so worried about the environment, seeing so much that had happened as we had gone through this really intense drought for a really long time, and some of our biggest rivers had completely dried out. These are very deep, wide rivers that go for thousands of kilometres across the country, from Queensland all the way through New South Wales and down to South Australia. And at certain points, they had been absolutely drained of water. There was nothing in them whatsoever. And you could walk down the banks of these rivers and stand on the sandy or muddy bottom of it, and there was nothing in there. And a lot of fish had been dying, not only for the lack of water, but also because of a concentration of chemicals because of agricultural runoff where it had pooled. And it was just so sad. And we were all, really upset about this. Everyone was upset. And I thought, how can we do something about this? How can we, what are we doing? And I've got to go and learn about it firsthand, because just sitting on my phone looking at it and being sad didn't feel like enough. So I went out on this trip that was organised by some Aboriginal communities and also some political groups and local environmental groups in those areas. And we learnt about the Aboriginal culture in the area. They did corroboree 5 nights from Walgett to Brewarrina, Burke, Wilcannia and the Menindee Lakes, which spans quite a big distance across this river system. And, we learnt a lot about the culture of the area. We also made a lot of friends, and we learned about the politics that were involved and the environmental effects of everything. But what was really important to me was learning so much about Aboriginal perspectives on how we look after the land and how welcoming they were in bringing everybody in to learn about this together, that this is something that we all need to work on together. So from that trip, 2 of the people that I interviewed were Uncle Peter Williams, who was one of he was called a senior song person, and he was leading a lot of the songs and dances on that trip. And we learned a lot from him and his family. And he has a lot to say and is an amazing teacher. And it's a really awesome thing to have him in the book explaining his how he wants everyone to learn about Aboriginal culture, and how he got involved with the dancing and the corroborees being awakened there. I also spoke to Uncle Bruce and Auntie Trish Shillingsworth, who were involved with the organising, and were often the voice of welcome at the beginning of the corroborees, bringing everybody in. And their biggest message is that we're all in this together, that we've all got to work on this, as a whole community, not just Aboriginal people, not just non-Indigenous people, everyone together. So, those were 2 of the interviews. I also spoke to Jo Clancy, who is my dance teacher. I do a contemporary style of dance with her, but she's Aboriginal, so she brings all these beautiful Aboriginal cultural traditional dance elements into what we do. So I talked to her about her journey becoming a dance teacher, and she also explained how she wrote a dance that we do called Juggler, which is the light bird. And I spoke to David King, who he is part of the Gundungurra community here, and they are doing a swamp rehabilitation project in Katoomba, where everybody in the community comes together, and we work on this rehabilitation of a swampland area together. We're taking out noxious weed species, and we're putting in natives to help the birds and the native bees and other animals to come back to the place. And it's just absolutely amazing to be a part of these community projects where everybody is invited to come and be a part of it together. And these people are so generous in what they share. And I'm really glad that you can read the book and hear it in their own words as well, because it's not just for me to be telling you about these things, though that's really important. I think it would be a disservice if we weren't talking about these things as people doing nature spirituality in Australia. I think it's really important that that's a part of what we do, to listen and be a part of that. But it also needs to come from those people too. So I'm really glad that they have shared their stories so that you can read them in the book. So aside from, I also spoke to Christopher Hughes, who is an author as well, and he's a native Welsh speaker, and he lives in Wales, and he runs the Anglesey Druid Order, And it was great to talk to him after having spoken to some of the Aboriginal people that I spoke to for the book, and get that perspective of Wales as a First Nations culture. Because in Druidry, we're so often looking at Welsh and Irish sources for texts and stories and mythology and things like that. It feels to me like there needs to be some respect paid to the people that have helped continue those cultures and those mythologies, and have that more direct knowledge because of language and because of place. And so, talking to him about that was really interesting too. So I'm really grateful that he could share his experiences as well. And it's made me think a lot about the idea of indigeneity in Britain. And I think that's probably where I'm going with my writing next, but we'll see where that takes me. So that kind of is a part of the book, is looking at those stories. And then there's, I talk a lot about the rituals that we've been creating as a community to process the grief around all of this loss in the environment. It's a lot to take in. There's been an awful lot of destruction. I live on the edge of where the fires were in 2019, and it was nearly 20 million hectares that burned, and it was actually Christmas Eve that the fires got under control, which was quite cute. All the kids were wishing that Santa would bring rain, and it came on Christmas Eve, and enough to stop the fires within less than 5 kilometres from our town. It came to the town that was just to the north of us, to Blackheath, and it was in my friends' backyards. And, it was incredibly, it's making me feel a little bit emotional just talking about it. It was intense, and how we dealt with that was really hard. But what we did do is we did make time to come together, and we found that the most healing thing is to share stories of how it's been affecting us, and also our art and our poetry, and us, sharing the stories on a personal level, but sometimes maybe sharing a creative story about it, or sharing some poetry. And I did a bit of research into this sort of practice as well, where there were other people creating different kinds of rituals. I learned about the Council of All Beings that John Seed and Joanna Macy were involved with beginning, and that's about taking time to go and listen to nature, sitting with a tree, or sitting with a rock or a river, or even a damaged place, or somewhere that needs protecting, or listening to the birds, or choosing something that you could speak for, in that kind of Lorax sort of way. Like, if the trees can't speak for themselves, who'll speak for them? The idea behind this practice is that we would speak for them in a council, that each person would go out and learn and listen to the voice of something in nature, and then we would come back together and share what it was that we'd experienced in that listening. And I went to a gathering that was put on in Queensland in the Bunya Mountains, so thank you very much to the organisers of that. And we went and we listened, and I listened and heard the voices of what felt like elder trees, missing elder trees in forests where there'd been where larger trees had been taken out, and that sense that the smaller, younger trees didn't have those elder trees with them anymore, that there was sort of this missing link in almost like trees' education, an understanding of how to survive and live through things like drought and fire, and that there was something in the roots that held them together and taught the forest how to be. That was my experience in listening, and people came back with all kinds of different insights. And it became really apparent to me how important it is that we listen and share these stories with each other. And so we designed this ritual called the Earth Gorseth. So a Gorseth in Druidry is when we get together to do bardic performances, really, to have a nice Stedford. And yeah, so we got together. I ended up doing it in Adelaide straight after the trip around the rivers, because everybody was feeling really sad at that time about so many things that were happening. This was even before the fires started. It was just the drought, and there had been fires in the Amazon rainforest that were really upsetting people. And there was a lot of climate rallies and people wanting action and change. And so, yeah, we did this Earth Gorseth, and we've done it a few times since then as well, as things change. And it's almost become a part of our general ritual practice in some ways too, because it's so healing to talk about how what's going on in the world around us is affecting us emotionally, how the lack of water in the rivers makes us incredibly sad, or the loss of forests and the animals that live in them brings a deep grief to us, especially when there's a feeling that humans may have caused that in some way, and that action isn't being taken to make a difference to help that. There's a really big need in us to share our grief over that, and beautifully, there's a lot of healing that happens in sharing it. And when we share stories and songs that are relevant to that, working with our bardic skills, working with that connection with spirit that brings inspiration, that helps us to find ways of expressing our emotions that can be understood by others on a whole other level, that you can't even expect the results of that. You don't know how it's going to manifest for other people when you start expressing that sort of thing, but it can be deeply healing. There's something quite magical about that, and that's what we discovered was really important. And what it brought us was a sense that we can continue, that we can keep fighting, that we can find that solidarity together to keep going, and to make a difference in our lives in whatever ways we can. For some people that might mean writing to politicians, or planting trees, or for me it was working in my community garden, creating spaces for people to meet and do things like this, and having food security, and people do it in lots of different ways. Sorry if you can hear a bit of a banging. My cat is playing with the fly screen. But yeah, this process, I suppose, of listening and creating rituals and creating art together and sharing that and finding solidarity and healing in that's been really important. And I realized how important that process is for the Indigenous part of things as well, in everybody coming together to the corroborees and hearing those songs and stories. It was almost something similar happening there. It was so healing for us all to be there. And yeah, I guess there's a part of the book that explains that there is a commonality in all of this, that in that listening to the earth, and that sense of finding the stories that are in the earth. There's a concept in Aboriginal culture that they call song lines, and a book was written that I was really inspired by, called Songlines by Margot Neal and Lynn Kelly, and it explained how the earth itself was used as a mnemonic device in these oral cultures. And I've realised Lynn Kelly also wrote the memory code, in which she talks about the possibility that the stone circles like Stonehenge may have been memory devices or mnemonic devices of some kind that might have held stories when people became sedentary, is her theory. But possibly as well, they're markers for waypoints on a journey where a story is told in between them. I think it's fascinating to look at the concepts that are similar, and these ideas that a story can be told as you move through the landscape, where this landform represents that character, or this part of the story happens along this river, or that hill is associated with another part of the story. And as you're moving through the landscape, there's different stories to be told, because the landscape itself is the book, is the mnemonic device for the storytelling. And I think that's something that cultures share across the world, that is when we're looking for that indigenous culture of any place, the stories that originate in a place, that come from the earth, that come from the place, that come from the people of the place. That's part of it. If there's landmarks that can join stories together, place names that evoke certain stories, I think that's absolutely fascinating. There's also a lot of the Aboriginal dance is about embodying different animals in the landscape to learn about them, and that's obviously something that comes into some other mythologies as well. I'm reminded of the poetry of Taliesin, where he says, I am a boar in valor. I am a salmon in a pool. I am an eagle on a cliff. He is those things. He becomes them. I really couldn't let my cat in. Sorry. Sorry, it's driving me crazy. Cats. And so where was I up to? So yeah, mnemonic devices and the stories that go through the earth, which I think is something that we can also engage in the creation of these as well, through listening. Of course, an ancient cultural connection is perhaps different to what we can create now, but there's also different beauty and different sorts of values and those things. And I think it's something that we should be creating now, because our traditions are living traditions. They're about listening. They're about connecting to place and to spirits and to the stories of the earth. And maybe learning about the ways that those stories meet us in places can also be a part of that. I'd also like, if anybody is listening and would like to ask a question, you'd be very welcome. I'm coming towards the end of what I'm talking about. So if you'd like to ask a question, do pop that in there. Okay. Hi, Deb. Hey, Julie. What advice would you give to people starting Druidry to honour the original caretakers of the land, as we do in Australia with First Nations? So, how would people honour in other places? I think you mean, is that right, Deb? So, I mean, I guess the important thing is to listen to the people in those places. Similarly to here in Australia, we have to go and, meet the communities, the Aboriginal community, or or if you're in the Torres Strait Islands, the Torres Strait Island communities, to find out what's important to them and how they want to be understood. And here, something that they've asked is to have an acknowledgement of country given. And that might not be an appropriate thing where you live. I don't know. Maybe you have to find out who are the people that are the knowledge holders of that place. And that can be quite an interesting thing to contemplate, I think. What are the oldest languages where you live? And are there multiple languages that have sprung from that language? Or are there living languages? Or are there languages that could be revived? And, those languages, sometimes language can open you up to so much knowledge. It can make texts more interesting because you understand more of the nuance if you can look at them in their original forms. Or, it opens you up to different ways of thinking about information. Because not every language holds things in the same way. It might, put a boundary around one concept in a completely different way to how English does. So perhaps looking at languages can be really fascinating. And I think learning about the mythology of a place as that's available to you is just the most wonderful thing, especially if, if they've been written down. What an incredible thing to be able to sit down and read the stories of the places that you're in from hundreds of years ago. And of course, folklore is fascinating too, which is usually a little bit more recent, but it's still ways that people are connecting with place. I think it's still really an interesting thing to understand. And I don't think you have to have solid answers on these things. It's a process of exploration. So the more that you can learn about it and the more questions you can find about that, the better, because it's just an interesting process. I've been looking a lot at Yorkshire and Lancashire, which is where my family are from. And I'm finding lots of little hidden gems in the history there. Little snippets of information about when the Brigantes met the Romans, and parts of those stories that are recorded in Welsh tales like the Mabinogi and other stories around it. And, and all the stories about different ways that people moved through the landscape. So, the histories of not just the oldest culture, but the ones that have come through and how they've engaged with the landscape too are really interesting as well. I think the more that we can understand about history, the better. In Australia, of course, we learn about the Indigenous cultures, but we also learn about the history of colonization in the places that we live, and the hardships that people went through and the difficulties that need to be healed, that need to be addressed, and need to be rectified in many ways. That more recent history is just as important in many ways to understand, I think. I hope that answered your question, Deb. Hi, Andrew. Oh, that's very kind. I love your work so much. It is so connected to the land and the spirit of place. Is there a way you tune into that, or is it just an affinity you have? I'm not sure what you mean. Is it connected to? I guess I go walking, and or I just you find a sit spot. Have you got a sit spot? That's a really nice thing to have. If you just go walking in your the most local natural place that you have, and just find somewhere that you can sit often and listen. And I think also listening while you're walking can be good too. There's something about that pace of walking that really brings about like an open mind to listening to the land, and looking, like using all of your senses to I love that story about the streams that go into the fountain of knowledge. So they're the 5 senses. These 5 streams go into the fountain of knowledge in that Irish story with Mananan. And I think that's really a beautiful way of thinking about it, that when you go out into nature, use all of your senses, like really get present with what you're experiencing. Look deeply and look symbolically as well. Maybe symbolic vision's a really important thing. Like, what does this color remind me of? What does this shape remind me of? What's the metaphor working here that I can find? Kind of like almost like a dream interpretation, but you're doing it with nature, thinking about all of the different ways that things join up. I think that kind of deep listening, using all of your senses, and spending time alone in nature is just the best. Any other questions? I really love questions. It's great. Great answer. And I love how you tell people to explore and there's no right answer. Yeah, well, there's lots of good questions. So yeah, try and find good questions rather than definitive answers, I think. And understand that this whole thing's a process, There's a lot of rebuilding going on in the world, in terms of that idea of indigeneity, I guess, that being connected to the earth and having traditions and practices that come from place, that originate in that connection of listening to the earth, whether they're ancient or something that we're doing today. And I'd be careful using that term, because sometimes we can use these things in a way that can be quite sensitive to people. But I've gone to some talks where Aboriginal people have talked about the importance of us all discovering indigenized thinking, and that was really powerful to me, to think about the community of earth, the idea that we are part of the place, that we belong to the place. That the reason why I chose that title for the book is that we shouldn't be thinking of ourselves as separate from place. We are a part of it, because everything that happens to that place affects us deeply. When the bush down the road is on fire, you feel it. You can't not feel it. It's scary, it's intense, and it's sad. And we have to recognize that we are connected to the place. We are a part of it. We belong to the earth. The idea of ownership of the earth seems really strange when you consider thinking about it like that. And the earth doesn't belong to us, we belong to the earth, is a really important concept for us all to get our heads around, I think. What are we responsible for? Because there's a reciprocal relationship going on there, that the way that we treat the earth inevitably affects us, because we're all connected. It's all part of the same thing. So taking that time to really listen to what the earth needs to be healthy is a part of caring for ourselves and caring for each other. It's caring for the whole ecosystem is so much more important than thinking about it in an individualistic sort of way. I think that's kind of the message that I wanted to get across in the book, that we are so deeply connected to the land, that it's our responsibility to look after it. And Indigenous cultures have been doing that for such a long time that, if we can all work out how to learn together in a respectful way, that's got to be a really important thing to do. Naz, hi Naz. Really great to hear of the honouring of Indigenous peoples and communities. It's so nice. I just have adored everything that I've learned, and I used to be quite scared. There was a lot of shame and guilt and fear in me, in being somebody that had come to Australia when I was 6 with my family, and not really knowing anything about Aboriginal culture when I was a kid. And, we got taught about it at school, and probably our teachers didn't really know what they were talking about either. And I was afraid at times to meet Aboriginal people, because rightfully I expected them to be angry with me and to be, wanting everyone to go away, because it had all been pretty bad. And I was absolutely shocked to begin with when everyone that I met was so welcoming and kind and just wanted us all to work together on caring for country together. And I really hope that you'll read the book and hear those words from the people that I interviewed, because it's so important to hear it from them, not from me. Yeah, thanks. Any others? Hi, Elizabeth. I think oracle walking with the senses is so helpful. Yes, I love that term, oracle walking. I don't know if you got that from me. I made a little YouTube video about oracle walking. I love that. I love doing it. It's so much fun. Where you go, like I was talking about before, where you go into nature and listen with presence and all your senses. But also you can go with a question, like going for augury, and, working out what's taking your notice, what's answering the question for you in that symbolic way using metaphor. I get so much out of that when I do it. It's really quite a special thing to do. I think we should all do it more, and you can do that anywhere. So the idea, if people don't know, is you choose a question like you would for a tarot card reading or something like that, and go for a walk and see what meets you. So when I moved here to the Blue Mountains from the Northern Beaches, it's a really, really different environment, and a big change for me to move up here. So I went and did an oracle walk to see what advice the land I used to live in would give me for moving here. And I ended up finding a nest of ants, and all of the ants were moving around. It looked like they were going to every single little part of the ground around their ant nest, and meeting every single other ant and have a little chat, and then move along and talk to the next ant. And I felt like, to me, the message of that was to make sure when I go to this new place to meet as many people as I can and talk to them and find out about where they've been and what they're interested in, and go to as many different places as I can and explore all the little nooks and crannies of this new place. So that's what I did, and I love it here. It's great. Hannah, I felt a sadness when my grandma's silver birch blew down in a great storm, and I have recently written a poem in honor of this tree. Are there any specific special trees in your life? Oh, that's lovely. That's what I was talking about with that. Like, it's so healing to use our art as a process of grieving. It's really, really powerful. I have so many special trees. There's a tree that I always talk to when I go past it. It is a very talkative tree. It's just on the morning walk that I do. I haven't been doing my morning walk lately, but I need to do it more, because this tree's always given me great advice. It's a beautiful, I believe it's a blue gum, though we have a lot of very, very similar trees up here in the mountains, and you have to be a bit of an expert to tell the difference between some of them. But I think it's a blue gum. It's very tall and straight, with white, like shiny white bark, like pure, like beautiful shiny bark, and it comes off in strips, and it's a really big gum tree, and it's helped me a lot through COVID, telling me when to like pull into myself and when to let a branch go. Sometimes gum trees, they'll drop a branch. They they'll grow when there's opportunity. They grow when there's water. And then if it's dry for a while, they might go, oh, I don't need that one. And they let it dry out, and then it falls away. And I think that was a really great message for, that was a message for me during COVID, that if there's things that I don't have the energy for. I need to just allow those things to drop away for a while until I can find that energy. And coming back to my core and my center, like this tree was, it was so tall and straight and focused on its trunk. Like the health of your body and the health of your home and like all these things that are very close to your center. That was like the message that I got from that tree quite a lot. Who knows what it would tell me now? I don't know. I haven't been to see it for a little while. I guess when something gives me a message, I think I kind of work on it for a bit before I need to go and ask for more advice. But it's always really good when I do. So for books, have you found that although your ancestry is not long in Oz, that you can find sacred spaces that resonate? Yes, absolutely. I remember when I was a kid, there was this waterfall just down the end of our street. Like, it's pretty awesome that we had this waterfall at the end of our street, but and it went into the lake that was at the bottom, and it had this palm tree that had fallen across, and you could walk on the top of the palm tree. And over the years, this little creek area changed, and it was different. But I remember sitting there when I was about 7, so I would have been in Australia only a year, thinking it was just the most magical place. I've always had amazing experiences here. I think places claim you sometimes, and being open to them. Maybe it was because I was a kid, and I was really open to it. But I just loved nature, and I felt like it was so magical, being in these beautiful places. We lived at the beach, and it was, really palm trees and surfing, and kind of very different to where I live now, where it's really mountainous, and we have a lot of like a mixture of very beautiful native bushland, and in the town areas there's a lot of introduced European species of trees. Whereas where I grew up was very much, almost subtropical beachy place. But I love both of them. I love everywhere. I think every single place on earth has got magic to it. And it's a matter of opening yourself to realizing that no matter where you are, you can be a part of that, and feeling the effect of it. You're in a place with beautiful, sparkling, clean water. You feel something from that. I mean, I do. I feel the energy of that. There's some message in that, some beauty that helps me to feel better. But also if there's something, sad that's happening, if there's pollution or if there's natural disasters, then that can affect us too. Whether it's positive or negative, recognizing that we're a part of a place no matter where we go. I think that's important. Annette. And Rachel, you have to just stop whenever you're ready, because I will answer questions as they keep coming. I'm a guardian of this place I live in Scotland, but I grew up and my family and ancestors came from the other end of the country. I feel like I'm an imposter at times, but I'm doing what I can for this plot and its animals. Yeah, well, I guess, it's some of the Aboriginal elders that I know here, they're not from here. They're from another country, and they pay respects the same way the rest of us do. They do an acknowledgement of country at the beginning of anything they do, and they make sure that they ask for permission, and they learn about the local traditions, and the things that the local people want to do. Just like no matter where we go, if we're not in our home space, the place where we're connected to with our ancestors or traditions or whatever it is, there should be that respect, I think, and that willingness to learn about the local place and show that we care about the people who are from there, that have that wisdom to share about it. I don't think it's there's sort of a balance, I think, between showing that respect and learning from the local place, but also being true to your ancestors and the places that you're from, and maybe it's about having a balance of those. I think because I'm not jumping in and doing Aboriginal traditions. I'm engaging where it's offered. We're working on on healing country together in an environmental sense. I'm learning what I can from elders and the community when it's, you know, presented to everybody. But I'm not doing Aboriginal practices in my practice. I'm listening to the earth. I'm learning about Druidry. I'm, you know, learning about my ancestral traditions, because, you know, that's like my country. You know, that's the place where I was born and where I'm from. Yeah, and which can be difficult when you're when some people are from various different places, or if they've been in Australia for many generations. And I guess you know, I can't talk to that because that's not my experience, but I would be fascinated to hear how other people manage that. And, you know, just like other things I've been saying, it's a journey and it's a process, and something we have to work out how to do as we go. But, you know, I think if we meet it with respect for nature and for our ancestors and for those Indigenous cultures that have come from the place, you know, we're on the right path. Thanks, Trevor. Any other questions, or are we done? It's been really great talking to you, everyone. If there aren't any more, I'll just let you know a couple of ways that you can learn more about what I do. So there's the 2 books, Australian Druidry and Belonging to the Earth. I've also got a podcast called Forest Spirituality with Julie Brett, and you can find out more about the other things that I do via my website, which is juliebrett.net. So, and there's Druids Down Under on Facebook as well, if you like that too. Thanks.